Your psychology friends are going to help you remember the parts of the brain. Let's start with the oldest parts of the brain, which are responsible for basic functions like breathing and walking. Here's a phrase that can help you remember the 4 oldest parts of the brain. Bandura, totally, rough-housed clowns. This is especially useful if you're familiar with Albert Bandura's experiment, in which children hit a Bobo clown doll with toy hammers after learning aggressive behavior from watching adults do the same thing. But the first letter in each of these words will also help you remember the first letters in the 4 oldest parts of the brain, which are brainstem, thalamus, reticular formation, and cerebellum. Got it? Great. But they're just fancy words unless we know what they do. Let's explore these parts of the brain from the bottom up. Your brainstem is the stem of your brain. It's located at the top of your spinal cord, where it enters your skull. It controls how fast your heart beats and how quickly you breathe. B stands for Bandura and brainstem. Bandura's brainstem allows him to breathe. Your thalamus sits on your brainstem. It receives information from your senses and forwards them on to other parts of your brain. T stands for totally and thalamus. Your thalamus totally tells your brain about touch and taste. Your reticular formation is made up of nerve cells that run from your spinal cord through your brainstem and thalamus. Your reticular formation is at work when you eat, sleep, and become aroused. Its job is to filter stimuli and pass on important signals. R stands for rough-housed and reticular formation. Your reticular formation is responsible for relaying reactions when you roughhouse. Your cerebellum is behind your brainstem. It helps you walk and remember. C stands for clowns and cerebellum. The cerebellum controls a clown's coordination. Okay? Bandura, totally, rough-housed clowns. Can help you remember brainstem, thalamus, reticular formation, cerebellum. Got it? One more time. Brainstem, thalamus, reticular formation, cerebellum. Okay? Now let's move on to the core of the brain and see how your psychology friends can help you remember the 4 parts of the limbic system. The limbic system is the part of your brain that controls motivations and emotions. And you can use the phrase, hungry hounds ate Pavlov, to help you remember the 4 parts of the limbic system. Hypothalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, pituitary. In a famous experiment about behavior conditioning, Ivan Pavlov trained dogs to drool when they heard the bell ring, instead of when they saw the food. So you can imagine how hungry these dogs might have gotten to the point of taking matters into their own paws. Your hypothalamus helps regulate hunger, so it makes sense that hungry stands for hypothalamus. The hypothalamus also influences your sex drive, thirst, and body temperature. Your hippocampus processes long-term memory. Use your hippocampus to create an association between hounds and hippocampus. This is how we store information for use later on for the test. Your amygdala is responsible for your feelings of fear and anger. Hungry hounds acted on their aggression and ate Pavlov when they found out that he was conditioning them with a bell. Your pituitary gland is a master gland that helps regulate the release of hormones. In our imaginary scenario, Pavlov may have overlooked the influence of the pituitary glands in the dog's reaction to the stressful experiments. Poor Pavlov. Hungry hounds ate Pavlov. This phrase can help you remember the 4 parts of the limbic system that are responsible for motivations and emotions. Hypothalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, pituitary. One more time. Hypothalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, and pituitary. Finally, let's look at the names of the last part of the brain. Your cerebral cortex is made up of 4 lobes. And the 4 lobes of the brain can be memorized using the phrase, Freud tore his pants off, which stands for frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital. It makes sense that Sigmund Freud, a famous psychologist who thought that many of our impulses are driven by sex, would decide to do away with clothing altogether. So let's look at what each of these four lobes do, working from front to back. The frontal lobe of your brain helps you speak, coordinate your movements, and it's also involved when you plan. The temporal lobe of your brain processes information about what you hear. The parietal lobe of your brain processes information about what you touch. The occipital lobe of your brain processes information about what you see. Freud tore his pants off can help you remember frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital. One more time. Frontal, temporal, parietal, occipital. So you've learned the four parts of the brain involved in basic functions: brainstem, thalamus, reticular formation, cerebellum. And the trick to remembering these is to think about how Bandura totally roughhoused clowns. You've also learned the four parts of the brain that control motivations and emotion: hypothalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, pituitary, which you remember when you imagine that hungry hounds ate Pavlov. And you won't forget the four lobes of the brain: frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital, because you'll visualize that Freud tore his pants off. Well, maybe you don't want to visualize that, but you can just memorize it.